No problem. Right over to you, Trevor. I know you've got a full room of people coming back in, and we're on to the next panel. So thank you so much. Enjoy, guys.
Thanks. Hello. I'd like to welcome Eldon Skye, Brian, and James. I think James is having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we may not have a camera feed, but I think, oh, there he is. I think we will at least have audio. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if my network connection starts dropping out, let me know, and I'll turn the camera off again.
Yep. Yeah, so I think this is a great sort of lead through. You know, we had a panel about entertainment and their use of the immersive web. We have a panel about education and their specific use of the immersive web. And now the topic for this panel is building spatial communities, building sort of online, immersive, and web-based communities that in some ways form the foundation of the two previous panels' efforts. So we heard a lot of mention of hubs, obviously, and Janus XR that James worked on before was a big sort of precursor, and is still technology that's used today. So why don't we take a quick sort of trip around the quad here, and please introduce yourself and where you are and what you're working on, and then we'll dive right into the questions. Maybe Eldon Skye, you go first.
Hi, and you can just call me Elgin. It's a little bit easier.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I didn't get back to you earlier to tell you how to pronounce my name.
No worries.
So my name is Elgin. I'm based on the west coast of Canada, and I'm working on the Mozilla Hubs project, which is super fun. I love to see how many folks have been talking about hubs already during the day. This is really exciting. So I'm now the product manager for Hubs, but previously I was the community manager. So I'm really excited to share sort of the things that I've learned over the last few years working on this project. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, so as Elgin mentioned, I'm Brian Peiris. I'm one of the developers working on Hubs as well. I tend to work across the stack from the front end to the back. And prior to joining Mozilla and working on Hubs, I was one of the developers working on the SDK at Altspace. So I have this history of working in the social VR space, and I'm happy to continue that here at Mozilla Hubs.
Okay, it looks like we have lost James for a moment. Hopefully he will be back, but let's keep rolling in the meantime. One of the things when I was thinking about this panel, one of the things that occurred to me is that I think for people like us who have been working on the web and specifically on web communities for a long time, there is a whole set of lessons that the flat web has sort of learned over the past 2 decades, really, about we all started off with sort of a starry-eyed view of what it might look like to have a global interconnected community all working together on to further human knowledge. And it turns out there was a little bit more nuance to what we are as a people, as a community, as a whole. It's not as single-minded and as single sort of monocultural as that, which is awesome. But I guess I wanted to ask you two and James now, taking the lessons that we learned from the flat web about community development, and now that we're moving into spaces like Hubs or Janus XR, what are the lessons that you've had to relearn or you've had to modify as we move into that new era? Maybe Elgin, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a good question. And one of the things that really appeals to me about Hubs is it reminds me of the internet when I was younger, just sort of like a free-for-all. The things that people are building in WebXR is just so cool and experimental. And I love how you can really make it exactly what you want it to be. It's very exciting. I mean, one of the things that is definitely a concern is things like moderation, making sure that spaces are safe. And that's something that, there's lessons being learned in the flat web that we can definitely, we need to be learning from inside of 3D spaces, because you're just so much more vulnerable. You're kind of exposed to people. You're in front of strangers. And fortunately, you can be represented as an avatar if you're in these 3D spaces, which is really nice. But, there's still these like risks about, being in a public space with other people and what kind of things they might say and what kind of content they might share with you. So we've got lots of things to learn. The Hubs team, we've been working a lot on like making sure that Hub spaces are private, so that only the people who you invite to join your space will be there. But I think that there's like a lot of things that we can continue to learn and develop there.
James, I don't know if you caught the first part of the question. Let me reiterate just for a second, which is that obviously we've learned a lot of lessons from the flat web about community moderation, and we're now porting those lessons into the immersive web, which is multimodal and has immersive spaces as well as flat spaces. Were there any lessons that you feel like you had to sort of modify or that were unexpectedly different when you started having communities show up in immersive spaces?
I think, there were definitely a lot of challenges, especially when Janus VR was operating as a company rather than an open source project. We definitely felt a lot of pressure from the community and from just people in general about the fact that these immersive spaces did allow a lot of abuse if you weren't kind of building to mitigate that. And as a small company, so I think Janus is in a bit of kind of a different place on the curve for communities. We had a very strong community in like 2014 to 2017, 2018. A lot of people were kind of, getting on board with this kind of new technology and kind of, using the platform we built. But then there started being a lot of like backlash against, specifically like VR, that type of very open kind of environment where you can hop in and you can do whatever you want, but that does open the door for a lot of abuses. And so Janus, we took a step back from the kind of is to start everyone in one shared place, so that everyone, you jump into the place, you see who else is there, you interact with them, but kind of the takeaway we took from kind of seeing what was going on these other platforms was, well, we're going to actually change things to be private by default. You start in this what we call the pocket space, and from there you can kind of jump out to these experiences where maybe you're there, it's a private one with your friends or things like that, and I think that kind of put a damper on our community building, really, because a lot of people then kind of came up, like they jumped into this space and it was empty, and then they jumped into another space from there, and because we weren't kind of putting people into a shared common area, they never really interacted with each other. So that was definitely a challenge for us. But kind of looking at kind of where this stuff is going, so as janusxr.org, it's basically just me running the project, and like I don't have the resources to do kind of community management, moderation, onboarding of people, things like that. So in some ways, Janus has kind of stepped back in a social VR community, and it's more a tool that people can use to build their own small communities. Like people are using it to put together like VRTO. VRTO, we had some kind of worlds that were connected to that, but 5Rs and there were like some conventions that were held, and they were all private groups. So rather than targeting the kind of one open community, it's more a tool for people to build for their own communities. And I think that's like the web in general. There isn't really like a web community. The web is made up of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different communities. They're all using the same basic tools to build the communities that are right for them. A community for one person, safe and kind of inviting, might actually turn off other people and you want people to be able to have the experience they want without kind of crossing the streams, you know. So
yeah, I do feel like we started off on the flat web with the idea that, right, there would be sort of one communal space. There's one Facebook. There's one Wave, or whatever, the MySpace, and these huge global problems popped up once there's a single namespace, if nothing else, where everyone's acting. And it seems like one of the evolutions of the flat web that is even more amplified when you go into the spatial web is that that just doesn't work, for a lot of the really tight community sort of effects that a lot of people are going for. So it's interesting to hear that Janice also sort of saw a similar path that way. Brian, I know that you've worked on two toolkits that allow people to create content and to create interactive experiences within the context of a social XR space. When you think about how to build those capabilities in such a way that they allow people to encourage community, what are the sort of lessons that you've taken away from now taking two passes at this?
Yeah, as far as communities using your platform to build new things, I think the thing I've seen over and over again is that you can never underestimate what people will do with the platform you give them, and they will always find a way to accomplish what they want to. So I think that actually plays into a lot of the strengths of the web, because the web has always been about interoperability and built on standards and allowing people to mix and match and link and so on. So I think we take a lot of that pedigree and we try to build it into hubs, especially because we're all about using GLTF as a standard for our scenes and our avatars, and that has allowed other people to build on top of what we provide as a base. And yeah, we're constantly surprised by the things that people do with hubs. Unexpectedly building things that we didn't really intend for, but they take it and run. And I think that's something we'll just continue to see with communities going forward, whether it's on the flat web or not. As people will take your community or your platform and run with it in really surprising ways.
Yeah, which seems both like a blessing and a threat in some ways, depending on what the intention is of the people. They will use it for that. And so planning for that seems to be one of the things that we're learning how to do. I know that a lot of people I talk to are interested in being able to, the way they put it is they want to be themselves no matter what platform they're showing up on. I know as the product manager, Elgin, you must have a lot of thoughts about the role of Mozilla in general and the Hubs team in specific about encouraging the ability for people to take their bodies and the information about presence and things from not just from hub to hub, hub room to hub room, but also from hubs to other instances of the Hubs platform, or even a different code base. How do you think about this problem, and sort of what direction do you think we need to head in to start solving this?
I just love when you can take the same avatar and then bring it over to different worlds. I have different colleagues who it's so strange because I don't recognize them when I see them when we're in different platforms, because I know what Dom looks like. I know what John looks like when he comes into our hub space. So for me, it's really important that people can bring in their own. So in hubs at the moment, you can upload your own GLTF model, and you can use our bone structure to be able to make it so it's got hands and body movement when you're in there. We don't support the full body avatars at the moment. So what you can import into hubs might be a little bit limited. You're not going to be able to have a full body avatar with arms that move, but it's definitely something that our community has asked for, and it's something that I would love to see us be able to work on at some point in the future, though I don't know exactly where that stands on our product roadmap at the moment. But it's really exciting because even if you can't bring in exactly the same model that you're using on a different platform, you can bring in whatever it is that you want to represent yourself. And I really like it because I feel very uncomfortable when I feel very uncomfortable going into different spaces where maybe I've got to represent myself as a human avatar, or like, heaven forbid, like a highly realistic human avatar, because it always really, like, I don't know, it's just not for me. My preferred avatar is to be like a fox or, something kind of silly, which I really identify with and I like. And so I think it's really important that we prioritize this going forward and make sure that people have that ability to customize the way that they show themselves on the web, because I think that's the real advantage of using hubs and social social XR experiences. Like if you're represented as an avatar, you can choose what that avatar looks like. You don't have to be your face. You can be, whatever might inspire you. And I also just want to note that if you're having team meetings in a platform where you can have dragons and snakes and robots, it's way more fun.
Indeed, that has been my experience as well. Yeah, I ported an old digital body from a platform that was made in the late 90s, and I ported it in. It's all blocky and chunky, but I love it so much. James, I know that you have been, I think, in some ways talking with the OMI, the Open Metaverse Initiative, and they, of course, are interested in some of these issues. Coming, with the background that you have of having worked on Janus now for, I guess, 7 years. How long is it?
I joined Janus in 2016, and then before that, I was working on kind of a web-based 3D engine, which is what became Janus XR.
So you've heard some of these ideas before, I'm sure. When you think about what the OMI and what the web community can do around this idea of portable identity or presentation, what are the main sort of directions that you would like to see the community as a whole pick up and work on?
Well, I think we've done a good job of standardizing on GLTF. GLTF has been a great kind of enabler, kind of as a base for that. And there's, on top of GLTF, there's another format called VRM, which is, it's a GLTF with a few extensions that kind of allows, more avatar-like, like inverse kinematics and things like that. So I think we've done a great job on the kind of file interoperability side of things. Identity interchange is something, it's difficult. That's something that even if you go back kind of mid 2000s, 2005 or so, there's a big, I don't want to, because everything gets so kind of blown up about the war, the web war or whatever. But there was, like OpenID versus Facebook Connect type of thing, and sign in with Google. Ultimately, Facebook and Google won that battle against a more kind of with OpenID, you could self-host your own kind of identity and kind of use that across any site on the web that supported that. So I think those type of initiatives, like, it's hard to get traction is the thing. People are so used to now sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, that they're like, why do I want to have a different identity provider? So that's a tough battle. And there's been a lot of discussion about kind of using blockchain for that. Also W3C, DID, kind of decentralized identity. I forget what the last D stands for, but basically the self-sovereign identity, where you host it yourself, you control all the data associated with your account. So I think that technology is really promising, but the hard part is getting people to adopt it. And then also, one of the fundamental problems I see with like sign in with Facebook or Google is that both of those companies made a concerted effort that you have one identity online, one identity only, your real name. And I can see from the abuse perspective that's a very powerful tool for being able to control abuse. If someone is being abusive on your platform, you can revoke their access. But at the same time, in real life, we all have kind of multiple personalities. I'm a different person when I'm in a work context than when I'm hanging out with friends versus when I'm, with my family. There's just social constructs that kind of force you to behave differently. So putting that all under one identity, and then, some people have parts of their identity that in parts of the world they may live in, parts of the country they may live in, they may not want that to be kind of openly known. Your gender identity, your sexual preferences, things like that.
Yeah, actively dangerous.
Out of, yeah. So, it's a tough problem to solve, because you want to be able to provide those safe spaces where you can kind of weed out the bad actors. And if you provide people with full anonymity, you can just kind of do an end run around that, make a new identity, and kind of continue your bad behavior. So again, I think that's where trying to leave it up to a single central platform operator, it's a difficult problem. Facebook is discovering how difficult that really is. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. I think it's an industry-wide problem for sure. Well, we have some questions that came in from the audience, so let's start working through those. Okay, first question is, can you talk about what it's like to build cities like CryptoVoxels and Decentraland versus building kits for smaller experiences like hubs? Pros and cons of that, and what do you lose in abandoning a virtual city? So it sounds like they're talking about sort of the one big world model versus the separate spaces model. Who would like to pick up that question?
I'd be happy to speak to this unless Brian.
Go for it.
So I just wanted to say that, there is a loss in terms of having people kind of randomly come into your space, which is a bit disappointing sometimes, because one of the joys about making these virtual spaces is these chance encounters that you might have. I think from being able to create an environment that's really custom and personalized to you, I think that there is a real benefit to being in a private space. I personally am just absolutely moved by some of the content that people are sharing with us in hubs. And it's often people sharing things in our show and tell channel that are these private, closed, in kind of contained spaces that they've totally customized to fit their vision of what they wanted their virtual world to be like. And I really like that we have that option, that someone can have this really contained and personalized space that really fits their aesthetic or kind of the way that they want it to be presented to the world. That being said, and you could maybe join these together in some sort of larger metaverse sort of situation, but it might be a little bit strange and discombobulating to jump from one to another and have it be a very different experience. And again, it goes back to that moderation concern and who are you running into in these spaces when you're trying to get a whole bunch more people into these sort of city environments who might not be from the same communities on their own. There may be strangers coming together in this virtual space, as opposed to maybe a community that already exists outside of the virtual space coming together in these neat custom spaces that were created kind of custom for them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the way I've heard it talked about is that physical cities have building codes for a reason. And one of the advantages of private spaces is that you make the building codes, you make the consistency or the inconsistency, which is hard to get in a one big world scenario. Okay, next question is, are there any mechanisms in spatial communities that make them easier to regulate and protect from trolls, bullies, and spammers? So this is sort of a flip on the question I asked earlier. I asked earlier what things were we relearning, but are there any mechanisms in spatial communities that make them easier?
I think one thing that makes it easier, at least at the current moment, is if you have something like a 2D forum or some online thing with a form, we've all had to fill in 5 million CAPTCHAs in our lives. That we've identified, I don't know how many stoplights, like there's all this kind of technology that's built because it's so easy for someone to build a bot that's just going to post spam on a 2D forum. In a 3D environment, that's a lot more difficult. It's certainly possible. We people have been working on these things. They definitely have kind of bots that can run around in the world, and if they want them to spout advertisements for things over VoIP, it's technically possible. But it's also, there's a much higher barrier to entry, and you need like more resources to be able to do that at a large scale. So it's more difficult to automate that type of thing for the time being. If this gets to the point where social VR worlds are kind of at the same scale as the web in general, there's going to be financial incentive for people to solve that problem, and we're going to be right back where we are now. So, yeah.
I think one thing I might add to that is that in a spatial world, you can literally walk away from someone, or teleport away from them, or teleport to a different room, which might be difficult to do on traditional social platforms where your profile might be public, or the thread that you're on might be public, and you really can't help someone just replying to you or spamming you or something like that on like a centralized system. And I think just giving people agency to be able to control their own experience is a big part in that. And there are different means of agency that you can give within a spatialized system that you can't necessarily give within a flat or real world system.
What's an example?
I think, as I mentioned, just being able to walk away from someone, or maybe just to block their audio. I think that's literally something you can't do in real life, obviously. And just being able to, I suppose, just control your experience in ways that you can't in terms of your visual and audio senses.
Got it. It looks like we have time for one more question, and it seems like the audience is interested in this interoperability question again. I get this question a lot, so that doesn't surprise me at all. Are there any aspects of interoperability, between spaces and platforms that you feel like, as a community, we need to pull together that we haven't discussed yet?
I mean, a lot of this, because we're building web-based systems for these platforms for these social environments. I know in previous talks there was talk of the WebXR navigation API, which is kind of implemented in Quest. It's not yet implemented in kind of Chrome or I think Firefox had the WebVR version of it, but they're still hopefully working on WebXR. So that type of thing at least gets us to the point where we can connect these two together. But there's a deeper question of like, what does it mean? We talk a lot about like inventory and the metaverse and being able to like move items from I want to bring my Fortnite skins through to hubs or to Janus or whatever. It's easy enough to say how that might work for kind of 2D or just simple assets, but when you get into things like I want to be able to pick up a gun in one world and then walk into another world and use it, it's, do you want people to bring a gun into your private hub space? Probably not. So there's a deeper question there's a technical question of how you accomplish it, and then there's the kind of more, call it a societal question of like, what does it mean to allow that? And I think we'll do a lot of explorations and probably take some kind of missteps.
Yeah, I agree. My general takeaway is that most of the interoperability questions are not technical. We can find solutions to most of the technical problems, but we don't yet have agreement on most of the social issues that are raised by these problems, and that's why it's pretty hairy. Thank you so much. I think obviously, the community aspect of the immersive web is foundational to almost everything else that we do on it. So I really appreciate you three coming on and talking to us about this and sharing your points of view. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for having
having
us.
us. This was really fun. Bye.
Bye.